The most chaotic and craziest day of my life was probably the day that our first child, Emma, came into the world. Emma was supposed to be born in May of 2021, but in January of that year, my wife Shannon began to show some troubling signs, some troubling symptoms, and she was rushed to the hospital one day with dangerously high blood pressure and a serious case of preeclampsia. Now, we still held out hope that with the help of bed rest and medication, we'd be able to hold on and get closer to her due dates. But only a few days into the hospital, we had to do an emergency C-section, which is about as much fun as it sounds, okay? It was chaos. I mean, the morning started out normal as can be in that situation. We're just sitting quietly in the hospital room, and then all of a sudden, doctors and nurses are calling us. People are rushing in and out of the room. We're being taken to all these different places. Epidural, I'm told to put on this white paper jumpsuit and a mask and a hairnet. And keep in mind, I had never seen a C-section before. My first thought when I walked in that room was, it looks like a medieval torture device, okay? Not a fun thing. And then there was blood and sounds of the machines beeping and doctors and nurses shouting back. They had to crank the OR up to almost 100 degrees because our daughter was being born so small, and she came out of the womb weighing 1 pound and 6 ounces. Now, even though the chaos of the operation was over, that's not where it ended, because for the next 115 days, we had to navigate what it was like to have a child in the NICU. And then even after she came home, we had to once again navigate what it meant to be the parents of a child with special needs after Emma got diagnosed with cerebral palsy. But the real chaos was not so much what was happening around us. The chaos I'm talking about was what's happening inside of myself. Fear, anxiety, worry, anger, all these emotions floating around inside of me as this traumatic event has happened to us in our lives. And I began to let some things drift until eventually I stepped on a scale one day and I was almost 200 pounds at 5'10", which according to doctors isn't good, by the way. But I had just let little things go here and there. I had given into the chaos and made excuses that eventually began to affect my health. I was barely sleeping, I wasn't exercising, and I had gained a bunch of weight. And as all the dust was settling from the thing that I could not control, all I was craving was for order to be brought back inside of myself. Now, chances are someone here this morning is experiencing a little bit of chaos in your life. Maybe not today, but maybe you have experienced it in the past, and chances are you will experience it sometime in the future. Maybe it's just the chaos of Christmas time beginning to wind down, or maybe it's the chaos of kids going back to school, or having a new baby in the house, or expecting a new baby. Maybe it's the chaos of health, the chaos of family, whatever it may be. The world can feel pointless and meaningless and just crazy sometimes. We don't like it. As human beings, we want things to go as expected. We want things to be in order. But that's not always how things go. The question I want us to talk about on this second Sunday of Christmas, this first Sunday in 2026, is how do I have less chaos in my life? Please turn with me in your Bibles to the beginning of the Bible, Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. Genesis 1:1. We are beginning a new sermon series this morning. We're going through the book of Genesis, which I'm very excited about. Genesis is an exciting book. It's a pretty long book, and we're going to cover the entire thing in 2026. We'll take some breaks every now and then as we observe special seasons in the life of the church, but this is where we're going to be the majority of the time. And it can be a controversial book. A lot of our theology rests on this, but what I'm going to be focusing on is the theme of this book is blessing. Genesis is all about what it means to live in the blessing of God and to live a life that is blessed by God. That's what Genesis is about. And naturally, the Bible begins with the beginning of everything, the beginning of the heavens and the earth. Now, this morning, I'm not going to be getting into the young earth versus old earth debate. I'm not going to be talking about evolution, because I actually think these scientific discussions distract from the author's purpose. The way I'm handling these essentially first 10 chapters of Genesis are they're sort of a primeval history that dramatizes these events so that you understand the theology of creation. I mean, think about it. The universe is probably one of the biggest subjects that we can talk about, and so it's very easy to miss the forest for the trees. And so we're looking at what creation means theologically, and that is the purpose of this. So I'm going to start out this morning by talking about how God is sovereign in his cosmic temple. Then I'll talk about how humans are meant to represent him in the cosmos. And then I'll end by answering the question, how can we have more order and less chaos in our lives? So first, God is sovereign in his cosmic temple. God is sovereign in his cosmic temple. Let's look at verses 1 and 2. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. Now, chances are you've heard those words spoken or read many, many times in your life. But I want us to pause here for a second and appreciate just how radical these words were in the time they were first revealed. How much different this is from other ancient Near Eastern creation myths that the Jews would have been familiar with. I mean, just take for a second and imagine in your mind's eye this scene. It's kind of hard to do, but if you were to imagine them, you're probably thinking about a deep darkness with some kind of ethereal, glowing, giant spirit in the midst of it. Dark waters beneath, maybe reflecting the light of this spirit, and it's just silence all around. This is radical because what we don't see is some divine battle or war that results in the accidental creation of the earth. We don't see the birth of a god. We don't see a god fighting another god or fighting some other force. There's no struggle here. It's just God in his eternal satisfaction there, separate from anything else. There is no birth of a God, no struggle. God simply is, and he exists in his eternal and infinite power and overflowing love. This was so much different than anything else these ancient people could have imagined. God simply is, and he does not struggle to exist or to create. Now, I'm going to go through, not the entire thing, but just some highlighted verses here in the rest of this passage as we see the creation unfolding. Okay? What's really important to understand about how Moses designed his creation story is that it is modeled after the dedication of a temple. When you look in the Old Testament and you see the temple being dedicated, it's a 7-day feast for dedication. And in fact, pagan temples are also 7-day dedications. And so if we're wondering why it's 7 days of creation, it's because Moses is trying to show that God is creating a temple for himself to dwell in. And he is completely sovereign and unrivaled in his temple. And the way we can see this is by comparing what Moses shows us about the true God as compared to the false stories and false gods of other ancient Near Eastern myths. So the first thing I'm going to point out is in verses 6 and 7. And God said, "Let there be an expanse in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters. And God made the expanse and separated the waters that were under the expanse from the waters that were above the expanse, and it was so." Now, why is this important? In the Babylonian creation myth, salt water and fresh water had to mix together in some kind of sexual union to give birth to the first gods. That is how you got the Babylonian gods, by water mixing. But what does God do in his temple? He separates the waters. No waters are going to be mixing in his temple. No hanky-panky is going to be going on for the sea. God does not rely on the waters for his existence. He is in complete control of the waters and separates them. God is exalting his sovereignty in his temple, and he's also showing how much greater he is than the false gods imagined by ancient people. We then jump down to verses 14 through 18. And God said, "Let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night, And let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years, and let them be lights in the expanse of the heavens to give light upon the earth. And it was so. And God made the two great lights, the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night, and the stars. And God set them in the expanse of the heavens to give light on the earth, to rule over the day and over the night, and to separate the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. I want to point out something as well. Look how easily God creates. He says something and it says, it was so. He demands it and it happens. That's how easily our God was able to create everything that we see around us. There's no struggle here. It's not hard. He says it and it happens. And unlike other myths, it's not that when the gods make everything, it's imperfect and kind of lopsided. God looks at it and says, it was good. Everything comes into perfect order the second God speaks because he is sovereign in his temple. And this section about the stars and the sun and the moon is the longest section of the creation story for good reason. Because in almost every ancient culture, the sun and the moon were the greatest of deities. They worshiped them, made sacrifices to them. They believed that the sun, the moon, and the stars controlled destiny, controlled fate, and they could actually predict the future by looking at the stars. And so this completely changes this narrative for them because, first off, God does not even give them names. It doesn't say sun and moon, it says the great light and the lesser light. Because even by giving them their common names, he's not just naming a celestial body like we think. The sun's a big burning star in the sky that gives us light and heat. Sun and moon in those cultures were the names of the gods represented by those heavenly bodies. So they're just nameless bodies, and they don't control destiny, they don't control fate. What do? They keep time. That's their job. And they give light to the earth. Instead of the people on earth worshiping and serving the sun and the moon, the greater light and the lesser light are simply there to keep time and give lights on the earth. These magnificent deities and other myths have been demoted to managers that serve the needs of the beings on the earth. God is completely sovereign and unrivaled in his cosmic temple. And then we get to verses 20 through 22. One more example for you. And God said, let the waters swarm with swarms of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth across the expanse of the heavens. So God created the great sea creatures and every living creature that moves with which the waters swarm according to their kinds, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. And God blessed them, saying, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters in the seas, and let the birds multiply on the earth. So God creates the great sea creatures in this part, the sea monsters. And in every other myth, we always see the gods having trouble with sea monsters. They're always fighting them. They're always worried about them. They're always threatened by them. These greatest fears of human beings are also the greatest fears of the gods. Their power and rule is rivaled by the sea monsters, but not so in our creation story. The one true God is not worried about a fish in the ocean. He creates these great sea creatures and blesses them and tells them to multiply. There is no fight for the sea. God is not stuck in heaven or on lands. He can go wherever he pleases. And he puts the hook in the mouth of Leviathan. Our God is completely sovereign in his cosmic temple. It's like I said, the temple dedication takes 7 days. And if you actually look at the way the temple's described in the Old Testament, you'll see it's sort of an imago mundi. It's an image of the earth. Every temple is a microcosm that sort of represents all of the universe, and the universe itself is a great temple. And they'd have these 7-day feasts, and at the end of that 7 days, on the 7th day, the deity was supposed to arrive at his new home. And so that's what happens in verses chapter 2, verses 1 through 3. So look at chapter 2, verses 1 through 3. On the 7th day. Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the host of them. And on the 7th day, God finished his work that he had done. And he rested on the 7th day from all his work that he had done. So God blessed the seventh day and made it holy because on it God rested from all his work that he had done in creation. Now, when we read that, we initially think, well, God must have been really tired. He needed a break. I mean, come on, he's done all this creation work. He's got to take it easy. But when you realize this is in the context of a cosmic temple, rest takes on its proper meaning. Rest is not, man, I'm really tired and I can't keep going. Rest is more like a king sitting down on his throne. Rest means rule. Rest means reign. God has not wound up the universe like some big clock and then gone on vacation. God has assumed his place in his cosmic temple. His presence is there. He is on his throne. He is ruling and reigning over all of creation. That's what it means for God to rest in his temple. He is present with us in every aspect of the universe. And you'll notice something else about the seventh day. Every single day, with incredible precision, Moses said evening and morning to mark the end of that day. But look what's missing on day 7. It never says evening and morning. This is not a mistake from Moses. This is Moses telling us the seventh day never ended. God's reign does not end. God is still resting in his creation. He's still present, and he's never going to leave. God is sovereign and unrivaled in his cosmic temple. Everything in the universe is under his control. But now the question is, since God has all this power and authority, what are his plans? What are his purposes? And how is he going to accomplish his will in his creation? That's where we get to us. Humans represent God in creation. Humans represent God in creation. Go back to chapter 1 and look at verses 26 through 28. Then God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. And God blessed them. And God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over every living thing that moves on the earth." Let's talk for a second about this idea of being an image bearer. What does that mean exactly? On first glance, you might think, well, an image, does that mean we look like God? Well, no, God's a spirit. We don't look like God. Maybe it has to do with our intellect and our creativity, some attributes about human beings that separate us from other animals. That's probably a Western modern idea from Descartes that we've imported into the text. It never says that. Maybe it means that we're spiritual beings, which is true. We are spiritual beings, but it doesn't seem to bifurcate us here. It seems that the entire human person, body and soul, is in view of this idea of being an image bearer. So if it's none of those things, what does it mean that we are made in the image of God? In the ancient Near East, an image bearer was someone who represented somebody else. The king was frequently referred to as the image of God. So when the king spoke, he was speaking on behalf of God. And instead of it just being one ruler, God has expanded this to all of his creatures, all of his human beings, to be his royal representatives who rule for him in his creation. And that makes total sense in the text, because the very first thing God says after he says, "I'm going to make them in my image," he says, "Go and rule. You have dominion. Everything on the earth is yours. You will subdue it." And so what we understand from this is human beings have a special role to play in creation. Whether you're old or young, fit or unfit, male or female, very intelligent or not very intelligent, all human beings, simply by being human beings, are a royal priesthood meant to go and serve in this cosmic temple. Not separate from God, but working with him to rule and bring about his purposes in creation. Again, compare this to other creation myths, and you'll see that the dignity of human beings is elevated so much more in the true creation story. You can go and look at the Enuma Elish, which is a very commonly referred to creation myth. It seems to have some similarities to ours. although ours is a polemic against that creation myth. And what happens is the lesser gods are getting really fed up with all the work they have to do. And so they go to Marduk, who's the head god, and say, we're tired, can you give us a break? We built you a nice house, will you give us some rest? And this is what Marduk says. He said, let me create a primeval man, the work of the gods shall be imposed on him, and so they shall be at leisure. In every other creation myth, humans are made as slaves to do the work the gods don't want to do. That's what we are. We're cattle. We're workhorses. We have no dignity. We were only made as an afterthought because the other gods got tired of doing their work. But in the true creation story, what we see is that we don't work under God, but with God, parallel to God, as His representatives in creation. That's who we're supposed to be. Not His slaves, but His children, His priests, royalty. That is your purpose. Which means that you, sitting here today, have a special divine purpose in the universe. Your life is not meaningless. It's not purposeless. It's not chaos. You don't have to wonder what the purpose of life is. It's to serve God and enjoy Him forever. That's the meaning of life. That's why you were created. You were created to serve God in this cosmic temple forever. You're not just some random person here by accident. You were made with a purpose to serve God in His temple. That is why we're here. That is what we're for. Your life has purpose. You have a role. You have a destiny. There's a reason for you to be here. And so even when your life feels chaotic, because as we're going to get to next week, the plan is not going the way God desires it to. But even when things feel chaotic, you still know that there's a meaning to everything behind it and that God is ultimately in control. And so we want to have more order in our lives. We want to have more peace in our lives. How do we do that? Well, you need to represent the ruler. Represent the ruler. It's hard to imagine that this is our purpose in life. When you look around the world, it doesn't seem like human beings are really doing what they were supposed to do. We kill each other, fight each other, cheat each other, betray each other, squander our resources, make a mess of things. Many times we're the villains in this story. But that doesn't mean our purposes have gone away. We're just fighting against them. And as we fight against the creation order, more chaos appears in our lives. We think that our lives are for us to rule how we please, but when we see that we're under God's authority in His sovereign temple, we know that everything we're supposed to do is supposed to represent Him well, even if we fall short. And this happens in the church too. I've talked to so many people who say they'll never set foot in a church again because someone who claims to represent Jesus behaved badly. Whether that's a pastor having an affair or the way a church handles an unwed mother. There are people who say, you were supposed to represent God, but you didn't do it well, and I feel betrayed. We often fall short of this in our lives, and thus chaos multiplies. How does this actually happen in our lives? Let me go back to the story I started out with, talking about how chaos had continued to happen in my life. Let me be very clear about something. In that time, that first year of Emma's life, where we were dealing with the NICU and her diagnosis and learning how to be a family, I didn't have an affair. I was not watching pornography. I wasn't abusing substances. I didn't go to jail for anything. I didn't have some big secret sin. Our marriage was fine. We were very, very stressed, but it was fine. There was nothing big going on. And that's my point. That's my point. We think God only cares about the big stuff. Well, when something really bad happens, when you get pulled over for a DUI or you cheat on your wife, then God's going to get involved. But none of those things were happening. What I had done was I had just given into the tornado of chaos in my soul, and it was a collection of small things that led me to a place that was still in chaos. You know, carrot cake is great. You shouldn't eat carrot cake every night after dinner. Even if Kroger sells them these little pans you can get and easily eat the entire thing. Don't even got to bake it. You just let it warm up on the counter. You can't drink 3 Cokes at lunch every day and then wonder, why can't I sleep at night and why am I gaining so much weight? You can't just lay on the couch and then wonder why you have no energy to do anything and then stay up till 2 in the morning watching TV and then wake up at 4 in the morning freaking out about what's going on and then wonder, why is my life in chaos? It was a bunch of little things that came together that led me to that point where I'm standing on that scale and looking at my face in the mirror and going, uh-oh, I can't keep going like this for much longer. And it wasn't anything radical. I didn't do a crash diet. I didn't go run a marathon. I just got up earlier, joined a gym, stopped eating carrot cake every night, took some supplements, and brought my life back into order. Because the thing is this, as human beings, we tend to put our lives into little pockets. You got your spiritual life, your family life, your work life, your hobbies, and all these things are in their own little boxes. And we think, here's the important things in my life and the not important things in my life, and God only cares about my spiritual life and the important things, but all the little things in my life God doesn't really care about. But if God made us, and He made even the crickets in the field and has numbered the hairs in your head, then God even cares about the little things in your life, like making your bed and brushing your teeth. And if we're going to represent God well, we need to walk in line with His purposes in our lives, even in the small things, because the big things don't happen overnight. It's a collection of neglecting little things in our daily lives that accumulate and become a problem. We have to recognize that if God is sovereign and the universe is His temple and we're made to represent Him, that means we need to represent Him well in everything we do in our lives, not just the things we think He cares about, because He created and is sovereign over all things. This is especially important for those of us who are Christians. If you're a Christian, then you bear the name of Christ. This is what Christian means. It means little Christ. And we represent Jesus to the rest of the world. So everywhere we go as Christians, we're supposed to be representing Christ well. And if we're living in step with Him and representing Him well, then we'll see more order in our lives. Yes, chaotic things will happen to us. We'll get knocked off center. But if we believe the universe has a purpose and God is in control, then we can walk through that fire, trusting in Him. People will begin to see that too. If you let God and you invite Him to rest in every aspect of your life and not just certain parts, people will see that your life is more orderly. Your kids seem to act different. Your house feels different. Your attitude radiates something different that gives people a glimpse of what the kingdom of heaven can do if we invite God once again to rest in our lives and walk in His purposes. This is how we can have less chaos. Yes, in this life, we'll never totally get rid of these things. We'll begin to see more and more that God brings our inner world in order because we're representing Him. We recognize our purpose in this world and His authority in our lives. That He's a good God, that He loves us, and He's in control. God exercises His sovereignty over the cosmic temple in which He rests and reigns by deputizing humans bearing His image to represent Him to the rest of the cosmos. So as a follower of Christ, you must represent God well to the world. This first story in Genesis sets the stage for everything else in the Bible. This is the stage in which the entire biblical drama is going to unfold. And what we see from the very beginning is that we do not live in a meaningless and chaotic universe. We live in an intentionally designed world that is reigned over by a perfect and loving God. Our lives are not purposeless, but we have a royal calling to be God's representative in the physical world. We must work to align our wills with His and align our purposes with His. The more we fight His will, the more we fight against our creative purposes and throw the world into chaos. So if you feel like the world is chaos, it might be because in some way you're adding to it. But if you follow the purpose of the divine ruler, you'll begin to find things come into order. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen.
Thank you for listening. You can join us on Sunday mornings at 10 a.m., Learn more about our services on our website or by following us on Instagram.